Hey, that's right. Well, I have one behind me just in case we want to go from Memorex to live. But Brian, it's so good to see you. Haven't seen you for a couple of weeks.
How was your trip to Denver?
Very productive, very productive. I can't say too much about the specifics, but it looks like another pre-startup has graduated to startup status.
Ah, congratulations. Congratulations. Perhaps, John, at some point you can sprinkle the keys here for a little live performance. It's good to see you, my friend.
I've heard tinkle the keys, never sprinkle the keys. I'll have to think about that.
Well, it just was a visual. I guess I don't know. Maybe it's because constantly in one of the presentations I had this line about sprinkling magic, and that could be its source. So, John, what a time here. It's summer. I don't know how that happened.
July 1st. I mean, where did June go?
I actually don't know. I don't know. And it is an exciting time. It's beautiful out. I got a chance to, I went to a little bit of a book launch party last evening with Ray Wang, who was there celebrating the launch of his new book, Everybody Wants to Rule the World. I sent him a text right before this show to see if he wants to join us to help spread the word of the new book. But I guess with that said, our first guest is backstage, and so we should just jump right into the official introduction. Welcome, everybody. July 1st, Intersections. We are kicking off the summer with some incredible conversations. So officially, welcome to Intersections, the weekly conversational jam session that dives deep into the intersections of technology, innovation, culture, and ideas. Every week, we bring diverse personalities and worldviews together in the service of greater understanding and unlearning, all in the name of growth. My co-host and co-founder, John Kao, is with us. The Economist has called him Mr. Creativity. He is a serial innovator, and as you heard, he is working on his next idea, constantly delivering keynotes and workshops. He's also a Tony-nominated producer of film and stage. He wrote the best-selling book, Jamming: The Art and Discipline of Business Creativity. He taught at Harvard Business School. He served as visiting faculty at the MIT Media Lab in Stanford, and he also chairs the Institute for Large-Scale Innovation. Make sure that you check out his Forbes column. Actually, we should probably spend time just go through the articles that both you and I write, and make sure you follow John Kao on social media. And before I turn it over to John, do share with us where you're tuning in from. We'd love to hear where you're at now. Share with us your comments, your suggestions, your questions. This is a community. Intersections isn't just about John and myself and who we have on the show every week. It's also about you and your participation, whether you're tuning in from Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitter. My goodness, all over the internets. With that, John, I'll turn it over to you, my friend.
Well, so turnabout is fair play, Brian. I am so happy to be doing this show with my innovation twin, Brian Solis. We share an obsession for that hard to define but oh so important word, innovation, and have complementary, I think, highly complementary networks and perspectives and skill sets to bring to that table. Brian's been deeply immersed in matters digital before digital was really a thing, and has made a bridge between digital technology and innovation, digital technology and marketing, digital technology and strategy, and also tirelessly evangelizes for these ideas through keynotes, through publications, through workshops, and also through his perch as Global Innovation Evangelist for Salesforce. So, hey, Brian, here we are.
Here we are. Well, with that said, I think we should bring our first guest, Stefen Kalb, on. Stefen, there we go. Oh, sorry, G, I don't know. You're behind the scenes. It looks like you're eating, so I didn't want to disturb your lunch. So I was hitting some buttons. Hey, well, you're the CEO of Shelf Engine. We also share a mutual friend in Amanda, and wanted to just dive right in. So tell us a bit about Shelf Engine, and welcome.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, first of all, I want to say thank you for having me on. Quite an honor to be here and chatting with you fellas, and excited for all the folks who are watching today. Yeah, so at Shelf Engine, we are quite a unique company, and I'm excited to dive into this with you guys, especially as you're on the edge of innovation, rethinking everything. We really took a different stance on a business model at a problem that has been an age-old problem, which Shelf Engine is in the food space. And we do demand forecasting for grocery stores and food service. But the unique part of what we do is that we're not a SaaS company. We actually guarantee sales for our customers, which means some of our customers are like Kroger and Target, to customers that are like Buy Right and Berkeley Bowl. We buy products for their stores, and for anything that doesn't sell, they don't pay for it. That is literally our offering, right? By doing so, we're able to radically reduce waste and at the same time increase sales for our customers. So we've gone to a very different approach to this problem of food waste in grocery stores.
That is, I was told that it was going to be a very interesting concept, and that certainly exceeds my expectations for what we were going to talk about today. So can you share the inspiration behind how you got there?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was running a food company. I did something kind of crazy in my early 20s, which is I decided to start a food production distribution company. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. It's a hard business. And, I was working with over at our peak, 400 retail locations across the Pacific Northwest. And something absolutely wild was going on, which I didn't understand, was that in these grocery stores, about a third of the fresh food was going to waste. And at first I didn't quite believe it. I thought something was wrong. And so I asked a lot of the executives, I was like, what is happening? How do you guys manage this? And what I recognized was that even with some sort of system that they had in the store, they were essentially guessing. You have people walking the stores that are guessing how much to order. And it's absolutely brutal once you actually walk to the back of the store at 9 p.m. at night and you see the kind of food that goes in the trash. And this is where all of a sudden I got really interested in this problem. I was talking to a friend of mine about it who had been an engineer at Microsoft for about a decade. And I was telling him, I said, this is what's going on. He didn't believe me. He's like, there's no way that the food system works this way. And so we said, we've got to do something. We've got to start a company together.
Wow, actually, you just made me think about, it's a great idea, and we'll dive deeper into how all of this works. You just made me think of a friend of mine, Fred Lelou, who is the CEO and co-founder of Era Technology, and they do something similar with AI and automation for supply chain forecasting and helping CPGs and you name it, oil and gas, anybody in the logistics business use intelligence and technology to do what human beings do in terms of forecasting. And I was surprised at a very complex space and a very dynamic and precious space such as food that it was a little bit dated, let's just say, in terms of the processes that are done. But again, I guess when you start to look behind the curtain, we see a lot of things that wouldn't really.
I think you guys would be blown away, right? Like I think you guys work in a space where you're essentially on the frontier of technology and you're thinking about the next steps. If you truly walk through the daily life of what people are doing in the food supply chain all the way to the retailer, I think you would be like, there needs to be an absolute revolution here. It can't possibly be the case that you essentially have this extremely manual and guessing process across the entire supply chain where you see this waste happening at every handoff, right? And that's in a way exciting because that's where the opportunity is. And that's where we can make a massive impact.
Wow. Now, but we have people tuning in from all over the world: Peru, Italy, Brazil. We have San Francisco. All right, John, your neighbor's on. Please do share with us where you're tuning in from. Share your questions. So my next question for you, before we get John involved here in the conversation, is this: do food producers want something like this, because I have to imagine that there's profit in waste, but also, what is it that you found most surprising on the buy side? So the retail chains, what is it that you found most surprising about, I guess, put it nicely, the challenge you might have in selling to them?
Oh, yeah. I'm glad you bring that up. I think that the first thing that I'll share, and that was really surprising to me, is that food waste is way underreported. So if you go look at a lot of the agencies that report on food waste, that are nonprofits or they're government agencies, they have numbers that are way less than is actually real. And the reason is that the systems at most of the large grocery stores are significantly behind in terms of being able to capture all the waste numbers. I actually go to conferences all the time and report on this. It is really striking. I have the very uncomfortable job of, in every sale, of whenever we connect all the pipes and all the data's coming in, that I have to call up an executive and tell them what his true waste numbers are. And sometimes it's multiples of what it is, right? Now, they understand their P&L, but they can't really quite match up what's happening in between their P&L to their true waste numbers. That made, in the beginning, things quite challenging. But once we went to grocers and we said, hey, we will guarantee X millions of dollars will drop to your bottom line, everybody perked up. And then we're completely willing to see how much waste is actually being generated out there. Now, your second question, which is a super valid question, which is, okay, well, what's happening to the producers, right? Aren't the producers in a place where they have some value to gain? Well, the equal and opposite situation is happening actually with out of stocks, which is that because of this poor ordering, there's actually significant levels of out of stocks, which is depressing sales. In the majority of scenarios that we launch into, not only are we reducing waste, but we're increasing sales. The net actually comes out to be quite positive for the vendors, which today the majority of our growth is because vendors are introducing us to many other grocers. And that's given us the ability to scale at a very fast rate.
Yeah, wow. I mean, I got to imagine that this becomes special. Just on an aside before I get to my last question, and then we'll turn it over to John, is that one of our Salesforce reports we published last year was called "The State of the Connected Customer," and the number one thing that they said they wanted to see in business transformation as a result of the pandemic, number one thing was trustworthiness. Number two was service and support, which I think we can all agree that every company needs better customer service. But number three was the role that a company plays in society. And aside from this idea of CSR programs, that this actually becomes one way that brands can play a better role in society by introducing the fact or spotlighting the fact that there is incredible amounts of waste, and that this becomes a competitive advantage, it becomes a brand value that will draw customers in because they feel like they're taking part just by shopping there, having a better impact on the planet. So I guess then the last question, I'm going to make a two-part just to squeeze an extra one in, John. Sorry, which is what is it that retailers don't know to ask you, right? So how do they figure this out? And then lastly, what are you seeing in terms of these times where everybody's trying to hire employees, and the role that you can play in sort of augmenting that challenge that exists?
Yeah, great question. So I think on the first one, the thing that I'm surprised by most grocers is that they actually have a phenomenal amount of potential margin that they're not gaining. Like, grocers could be rich if they wanted to be, but they're not necessarily thinking that way. And I wish that in most meetings that they would ask me, like, how do we make a massive impact to our bottom line? And many of them have that opportunity to do so. I think that from a perspective of, an outsider's perspective who doesn't necessarily run a grocery store, and you look at the margins they're actually creating, you're thinking, wow, like on average, a grocery store does 1.9% EBITDA. Like, that's extremely low. That's like basically living off life support. Like, there is a massive opportunity. The second question that you're asking right now is something that's very apropos to the time, which is there's massive labor shortages going on across the country. What we see right now with most producers is they can't produce a lot of the goods that need to go to the stores. And so there is this term in the industry called fill rates. The fill rates, which is how much the producers are able to fulfill in terms of each orders are pretty low. We're seeing in some regions as low as 50%. In some other regions, it's 70 to 90%, which means you make an order of a box of apples and you want to order 10 boxes and they can only deliver you 5. And that's happening across the store. It's happening across the entire supply chain. People on the farms, people in the trucks, people in the production facilities, they can't hire enough people. They literally can't produce. So Shelf Engine's been addressing this directly by increasing efficiencies with the suppliers and with the stores such that they can free up their labor. The reality is that most of the labor in a lot of these facilities are working on a lot of things that are extremely manual. If we can take those kinds of duties away, then they can focus on actually producing and meeting some high fill rates. We are in a very unique time in our country, I'll say. We're seeing this across the globe, but in our country specifically, I've never seen fill rates like this before. It's quite dramatic.
Yeah, I mean, I got to imagine that across the board, we've never seen a lot of things that are happening right now.
That's fair. That's fair.
Especially in humanity, but that's another topic for another day. John, over to you, my friend.
Well, I've been listening with great fascination. I want to get a little bit deeper into the nuts and bolts of how this works, and also to understand kind of the context. What actually happens to the quote-unquote waste that comes out of grocery stores? Does it really literally go to landfill, or are there other productive uses of it that haven't been either discussed explicitly or discovered yet? And then who decides what the sell-by date is? I mean, who decides that you have to throw the sushi into the garbage today and not tomorrow? And related to that, how compliant is the typical mom and pop grocery store in recognizing those sell-by dates? Because their interest is in selling stuff, and we've all heard about people who bite into the hero sandwich or the sushi and discover that it's actually way beyond its sell-by date. So, I mean, I just want to kind of understand the context, because what you're doing seems so important that understanding the game board, at least, in our context, would seem to be really important in terms of getting a sense of, how big this can be, how big a deal this can be.
Yeah, I'm glad you're asking this. I was at a conference at the beginning of the week speaking. It was Waste Expo, specifically about what's happening in terms of food waste in the back of a grocery store. So I think you'd be quite disappointed to know that the majority of the food is going to a landfill. We actually we have tons of pictures. Every time we onboard a new customer, we go and take pictures in the back of their store, and we show them what's happening. And it's giant trash cans with black lined plastic bags that are just getting filled. The sad thing too, on top of that, is that the majority of grocers are doing something what's called perception dating, which means that they will pull product a day or two before it expires, so that a customer always has a very good perspective of the store and its freshness. So this food really could be going to a secondary market. Now, in certain municipalities, there are some really good operating nonprofits who are able to come and grab that food and bring it to a food bank. However, food banks, which it's not a very popular view, like it's not very well shared. Food banks are actually overwhelmed with the amount of food. There's a tremendous amount of food waste that happens at food banks. So in terms of, if you think about a secondary market, food banks really aren't the place anymore to send that food. And so what you have is a lot of food that is sitting at the store that just gets thrown away. This is one of the next things that we really want to tackle. And being super frank with everyone here, when we work with a customer, we own the inventory, which means when the food gets wasted, now even though we're able to drastically reduce that waste, we still technically own that food. We are actively trying to solve this very problem, which is how do we get this food to secondary markets? Now, there are some markets that are, for example, like animal feed, which is a great opportunity. But more interestingly for us is how do you get somebody to really eat this food? Because it's very nutritious. It's good food that is at a store. It's a hard problem.
Well, who decides when something has exceeded its sell-by date? I mean, I get this from my kids all the time. They look in the refrigerator and they say, "Oh, these chickpeas have they're expired. We can't use them." And in fact, my sense is they're in anaerobic packaging, and what the heck? So, is there a national regulatory standard? Is it?
There is. Yep. So the USDA and the FDA both have their own standards. It's actually really quite comical because they slightly overlap in certain areas. Like, for example, the USDA oversees wraps, but the FDA oversees sandwiches. But anyway, they overlap. Yeah, it's kind of hilarious. But what they do is they have a standard, and it's very funny, and you'll laugh at this, because what they basically say is figure out the shelf life of the item, and then cut it in half, and that's your sell by date. That's literally the rule.
It's building waste into the system, right? Because
it is.
Food has a service life far beyond the sell by date.
Yep. Exactly. And so the question that we have now is like, okay, well, as a country, how do we address this in a safe way so that we're not necessarily putting a sell by date that is at the very extreme end of things? But at the same time, if your milk is on the expiration date, it's very likely that you have a long time to go before it's actually bad.
Yeah. And I imagine there are other uses besides animal feed. I mean, I'm just thinking that, from an ecological perspective, you have to use a lot of planetary energy to go from the inert state of these food products to their finished state, and then what you're doing is just throwing them away. So you're wasting all of that biological energy. Whether it's fertilizer or industrial uses, you're creating complex molecules that ought to have some additional utility.
Oh, yeah. I mean, if we just look at just the plastic usage that is in place, right? So the grocery stores that do a good job of essentially sending this food to animal feed, they're literally taking the plastic containers out, taking the food out and separating that out. When you see the quantity of plastic that is out there, you'd be blown away. Also, think about all the extra truckloads that are moving because they're moving this extra food waste that's never going to be sold, right? This food that is going to go through. So the impact is absolutely massive. I think the way that I think about it, and what I'd really like to see our country do, is on a policy perspective, have an extra amount of focus specifically on telling grocers that they can't over order at a certain percentage level, because that is the core of the problem that we have thus far. Now, everything that happens to the waste stream, which is where policy is going, which is essentially saying don't throw food away, is fine. That's great. But the core of the problem is really over ordering.
So how scalable is your business model? And I mean scalable in the downward sense. So what I'm hearing, and I don't know, obviously I don't know very much about the actual model, is that it's a fairly complex offer to the grocer, right? And I'm curious as to how this might spread, and like wildfire, not just in North America, but to food services in other countries, and to smaller, not even mom and pop, but just kind of smaller food distribution outlets. Does this require kind of a minimum scale in order to support the business model, or are you envisioning that it can go even more broadly to the base of the pyramid, I guess you could say?
Yeah, absolutely. It does not require any sort of minimum scale. We do focus on some of the largest grocers today because that's where we can have the largest impact right away. But nonetheless, if we work with everyone from a small coffee shop that is trying not to waste as many muffins to some of the largest grocers in the world. So it has its same impact. What I'm really hoping to see, first of all, because Shelf Engine's goal is to manage 100% of the grocery store and all of grocery in the United States. We want to get to a place where it seems crazy for a grocery store to essentially order on its own, right? From that standpoint, can we reduce waste so dramatically, right? That we not only, like right now, we're reducing waste roughly about 60 to 70%, depending on the store we launch. But how do we reduce it to that 90 percentile, right? That's the exciting place that we want to get to, the place where we see all those truckloads reduce. We see all that plastic usage reduce. We see all these farms reduce the amount of product that essentially is going straight to a store that will never be sold. That's the exciting vision for us.
Well, and every percentage point reflects a huge amount of value, and from a whole variety of sources. I mean, I imagine you've done the analysis of all the indirect expenditures as well. You just mentioned trucks and, you know, the energy to move stuff around and, you know, to repackage the stuff that you're going to throw away so that you at least have some semblance of efficiency in terms of the disposal process. And, you know, I'm sure there are many others. And so if you do the whole social cost accounting, it's really quite a big set of numbers.
Yeah. Oh, it's absolutely massive. And then there, you know, there's also probably a lot of things that we don't even know about, right? There's probably a lot of uses of products that we don't realize are happening across the entire supply chain. So the impact is likely much greater than we actually think it is.
So it seems to me that, I mean, this is one of the most exciting initiatives I've heard about in a long time. And it seems to me that you are in a great position also to have a thought leadership position on this topic. So I wonder if you've published, you know, aside from great shows like Intersections, you know, if you've actually published white papers or if there's a monograph in the works. And also, have you been in touch with people like the UN around the SDG, you know, the food SDG community or the World Economic Forum? Because it seems to me that you've proven the model, right? So now the question is finding scale and finding allies.
Yep, absolutely. So you're mentioning two very good things. So yes, we've written some case studies. The unfortunate thing about the case studies is that we can't share any names because they're our customers. One thing we would really love to do that we're trying to convince our customers to do is to let them or have them let us be able to share their names, right? Because the waste reduction is so massive that it really needs to be shared and it needs to become an industry standard. So if you're a grocer that is wasting at a certain level, you need to know that you can meet something that is much better. In terms of the UN, actually, yes, we've had some good conversations, and there are quite a few nonprofits out there. The question is, how do we embed the community to such a degree that they can really share the data? And that's the part that we are trying to push, because there's one vision that I have here, which is imagine that you could walk in the front of a grocery store. You know how you walk into a restaurant and it says how the health standard of that restaurant is? It has a grade there. Imagine if you could go to a grocery store and had a grade in terms of how well it's doing in terms of food waste. Mm-hmm. That would be really cool. You would actually know when you're walking to a store how well it's doing. Today, we don't have any of that transparency.
So, you know, then also through the lens of data science, what you're doing in terms of collecting various kinds of data is going to be really, really important in terms of improving the model, you know, creating those kind of credentialing regimes and so on. Yeah. So I presume you're paying attention to that because that's where a lot of the value is going to get created over time.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And you know, I would imagine there are other social systems. So, you know, this obviously isn't just a U.S. problem, although we tend to be very wasteful in the U.S. And maybe there's a social system out there where you could actually model a more kind of encompassing set of phenomena and gather the data where people wouldn't be as worried about their image. And the other thought I have for you is, you know, places like Harvard Business School, where I used to work for a while, and Stanford Business School. We're going to have a friend in just a second who's a professor at Stanford, have a second-year marketing and strategy projects where they assign teams of not super experienced, but really smart MBA students to analyze a particular situation. And so that's a way of kind of getting a cutout on the phenomena and documenting it and and maybe even dealing with some of the kind of concerns that your clients might have about revealing their identities or amassing anonymized data that at the same time has the, you know, stamp of good approval or legitimacy because it comes from a you know, a legitimate university.
Totally.
I'm just thinking that anything you can do to create momentum in terms of your thought leadership and getting the message out there. I mean, I feel like I track a lot of things, but what you're talking about intuitively, I recognize the problem, but what you're doing, you know, I'm very happy to be, you know, briefed on it now because it's changed the way I look at things. I'm sure would be true of a lot of other people as well.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, John. And I would love to be more connected to Harvard Business School and to Stanford. I think getting those kinds of universities and that kind of talent aware and engaged on this problem would be great.
Well, the way the projects work is they're first and second semester. So this is a good time to be, at least trying to identify who some of the targets might be. Stay tuned. And thank you very much. This is really great work you're doing, and I couldn't be more excited about it.
Thank you.
So, Brian, back over to you for final comments.
Yes. Thank you very much. And we're what a great conversation to have at such a great time. And I look forward to seeing your company grow because the more you grow, the more that we're actually having an impact in the industry, and also looking forward to expansion into other industries where waste is just prevalent. It seems to be part of the American way, unfortunately, but we can change that. It looks like we could change that in our lifetime. So thank you very much, and thank you for doing what you're doing.
Indeed, and thank you for having me on the show, gentlemen. It was a real pleasure, and looking forward to continued conversation.
Great, all
Excellent.
the best.
All the best. All the best. That was exciting. I'm pumped up, and I'm also really excited about you guys. Great questions there, John, and maybe this is something where we can help shine a light. In fact, if we can think about maybe turning this into one of our first collaborative articles together that we publish on Forbes or in multiple places, I think this could be a real good hit, a good conversation to start. So maybe this becomes something we follow up with.
Well, we've also talked about doing deeper dives on topics and maybe involving more than one interviewee, not exactly a panel, but more like a collaborative discussion. And I think this whole notion of, there's so much to talk about here in terms of social enterprise and the sustainable development goals. And, really applying the very best tools of business to look at problems that, aren't necessarily just about squeezing more profit out of an existing business model, but radically reimagining what something fundamental in society could look like. And I'm willing to believe, now upon reflection, you can just buy into this whole idea that people are just doing stupid things all through I don't mean that they are stupid, but that the processes are stupid all the way through the value chain. And we shouldn't stand for that because we can't really afford it as global civil society.
Well, you'd think so, right? As a global civil society, it would that wonderful sentence right there would make everything better in life across the board, instead of division and in greed and all of the things that seem to be making some really horrible decisions and some trends lately. So I love the idea, and I think we should maybe it's the first salon, and maybe it's a digital salon to kick off, and we look at other guests. I'm sure Stefen has some folks that he might recommend. With that said, I believe Jeffrey's he's backstage, but I don't see him on camera. Jeffrey, if you could hear us, maybe you can pop in front of your camera there, and that way I'll bring you on screen so that John can give the formal introduction.
We see a colorful pattern, but no human. Well, I suppose that I can begin the introduction, assuming that Jeffrey's going to show up. I actually met him in rather unusual circumstances. He is, as I think some of you know, but it's worth mentioning, is occupying an endowed chair of organizational behavior at Stanford Business School, otherwise known as GSB. And I met him when I was at Harvard Business School, HBS. So we began a conversation that has continued in an intermittent fashion to this day. So I'm excited to have a conversation with him because there's one work of his in particular that has really influenced my thinking to the point that I've given more copies of that particular book away than any other book in my acquaintance. And
can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. We cannot see you. We see the curved exterior of, I guess it's the GSB building.
I don't know why I'm in front of the camera. and it says the camera's on.
Well, at least we have your voice, Jeffrey. So I'm in the process of introducing you. So in order to keep pace with our window here, why don't I continue? And if we can get your image, that would be great. I know that we have a graphic shortly that shows a maybe slightly younger version of you and the cover of one of your books. So let me continue with the intro then, and then we'll jump in. So Jeff Pfeffer is the Thomas D. II Professor of Organizational Behavior at Stanford Business School. And as I mentioned, I met him when he was a visiting professor at Harvard Business School, which I've had a long association with. And we've had this intermittent but continuing dialogue ever since at that time. The reason that I'm particularly excited to have Jeff on the show, aside from the fact that I'm very happy to reconnect with him, which is one of the virtues of the pandemic, is that he wrote with a colleague of his, Bob Sutton, a book called The Knowing-Doing Gap. And it's a deceptively simple title. I have given more copies of The Knowing-Doing Gap away to colleagues and clients and friends and partners than any other book in my library. And it's a concept of great utility. You know, Jeff has done many other things, written many other books, been on boards, taught at other august institutions. I think what we're going to do in our 25 minutes or so is really jump into the knowing-doing gap. So with that, Jeff, welcome to the show.
Thank you. And let me apologize. I'm actually in a Stanford studio looking at a camera, and I have no idea why you cannot see me.
Well, we won't draw any implications from that for sure. But we will have.
I actually arranged to be in a very, very fancy Stanford studio, and I can see you, but I have no idea. And the background that you're seeing is actually not even the background behind me. So I have no idea what has happened, but I used the studio to teach all winter, and it worked fine.
There's probably some kind of a background graphic toggle switch that uses this canned background and then switches over to the live camera. But you know, we have other fish to fry, as they say.
Okay.
So I think it would be useful for the audience. I'm a big fan of the whole notion of trying to understand the knowing-doing gap, and it would be useful, I think, for our audience, first of all, just to understand what the knowing-doing gap is, and then we can go from there. So what is the knowing-doing gap?
So in a sense, the knowing-doing gap is that many organizations know what to do. They've spent a lot of time and money on consultants and on getting panels together and on building and developing expertise, and they do not implement what they know. So there are hundreds of examples. I think many organizations know that they ought to invest more in training, but they don't. I think many organizations know that the people are the key to their success, but they don't treat their people in ways consistent with that. So the knowing-doing gap is the gap between what organizations know and their implementation of that knowledge. And the basic insight is that knowledge is not worth anything if it's not implemented. So if you know something, but you don't act on that knowledge, you might as well not have the knowledge.
What impressed me in the book was how you detailed almost a litany of how bureaucratic obstacles to implementation got in the way of, you can be smart, but not walk the walk, as we might say, and that filling up schedules with excessive busyness and assigning people to do reports that were more ritualistic than meaningful, and organizational processes that were filled with friction and kind of make work kind of tasks were all the enemies of implementation. Am I kind of capturing some of those bureaucratic obstacles that you described?
Well, I think, yes, you are. I think there's two or three things that really stand out. I think measurement is a big issue. Many organizations believe that they prioritize things, but don't measure it. My current work is on the issue of employee health. It is not, for instance, big news that healthy people are more productive and less likely to turn over and less likely to miss work. But organizations oftentimes do not measure employee health. And so to the extent that our measurement systems really get in the way of organizations doing what they ought to do, we have measurement systems that emphasize costs and the expenditure of resources, but oftentimes measurement systems that do not capture the value created by that expenditure. And so that leads to a regime of cost cutting and a deadly cycle of basically shrinkage. That's one. I think another big issue, which you've alluded to, is that many organizations use talk to substitute for action. So today, of course, diversity and inclusion is a hot topic. So what are we doing? We appoint a director of diversity and inclusion, and we think we're now finished, as opposed to actually doing something around diversity and inclusion. Or we appoint somebody, to be the chief, I think the chief revenue officer or chief health officer or chief whatever. We often substitute what I would call virtue signaling for actually doing something about the problems we're addressing. So talk very often substitutes for action. We have meetings to discuss things as opposed to actually doing something about it, as opposed to doing rapid prototyping.
So is there, well, let me ask a different question first. So has your thinking about the knowing-doing gap evolved over the last couple of decades? Because I note that, I mean, to me, this book is a classic, and it was first published in the year 2000. Now it's 2021. Has anything changed about your thinking, or are there new speed bumps that represent new forms of the knowing-doing gap? I mean, has the digital revolution or social media or new modes of communication kind of added to the problem or mitigated the problem in some way?
No, I think the problem just continues along. It's because I think the core of the problem is that many organizations, your and Brian's work notwithstanding, don't really have a good sense of what their business model is, don't have a very good sense of what their most critical priorities are, don't have a really good sense of what they ought to be doing. And to use a word that I hear often, they're not really aligned. They haven't bothered to align people around what they're trying to get done. And so it's relatively easy to get diverted. And so they do.
So you're saying that there's a fundamental lack of clarity about organizational purpose, business model, picture of the desired future, et cetera, and that therefore, how could they get anything done because they lack that clarity?
I think that's a piece of it. And then we have all of these, rituals. I mean, many organizations have the same measures, even though they're trying to implement different strategies, which gets in their way. Many organizations love to have meetings, though the one virtue I think of the pandemic is that it is caused people to get Zoom fatigue, and so maybe we're having fewer meetings that go on for less time. And many organizations, notwithstanding all the new technologies that you alluded to, really are taking the past into the future. So you see this particularly at institutions that you used to work at and that I still work at, where we have long-standing traditions, even though the thing may have only been done once, and we're going to operate in the future just as we did in the past.
Sure.
And again, I think the pandemic is certainly, with respect to education, has certainly I think shaken things up, and people are rethinking their assumptions. I've certainly rethought my assumptions about how to deliver the classes that I teach.
Sure. So, is there a kind of Jeff Pfeffer compliant list of things that organizations can do to avoid or to mitigate the knowing-doing gap? I mean, are there some generic pieces of advice that you might provide?
Well, so I think there are many generic pieces of advice. One is I've already alluded to, and that is this idea of, if you to become much more action-oriented. Certainly IDEO, a company that I know you're both very familiar with, their motto is, enlightened trial and error outperforms the planning of flawless intellects. The idea of prototyping, the idea of taking action and learning from that action is certainly one piece of, one obviously piece of advice. The other piece of advice I would give people is to make sure that your measures actually capture what you're trying to do and capture the most important components of what your organization is about, and capture, what is really driving your organization's success in a good way, to get out of this kind of, in other words, to create meaningful measures. I think that would be a second thing. I think, so the action orientation, the measures. I think a third thing, so one of the big causes of people not taking any action is because they're afraid of making a mistake. Mm-hmm. So Deming's first principle, as you both know, was drive fear out of the organization. And I think organizations are too filled with fear. People are afraid for their jobs. They're afraid for telling the truth. And so driving fear out would be, I think, a third thing that organizations could profitably and healthfully do to make things better. That would certainly be big.
Yeah. I mean, denial is just an incredible force in the universe. I mean, I had the experience in clinical medicine that people, often would not change their behavior until they'd had not one heart attack, but 2 heart attacks. And so it just seems like breaking through denial or confirmation bias is a big task. I mean, there's so much more we could unpack. I guess the final question I wanted to just pose to you is a kind of a special case of the knowing doing gap, because, as you know, I've continued to plow the fields of till the fields of innovation, and I get constantly in work that I do, I run up against the phenomenon of innovation theater. I actually tried to trace the origins of that term, but the original, the author of that term, the identity of that person is shrouded in mystery. But I love it because really, I mean, partly it reflects the state of innovation as not really being a full-blown discipline, but really more like a field. But I think you're well familiar with the phenomenon of leaders getting up there and waving their hands and exhorting the troops to action, and putting the innovation meme into the corporate value statement, and having offsites where people are given permission to come up with wacky ideas, and then nothing happens, and people wonder why nothing has happened. So I wonder if you had any thoughts about the special case of innovation and innovation theater, especially since implementing innovation at scale and in a meaningful way is probably one of our most urgent priorities.
Well, it's not just innovation theater. I think I think there's theater about many things, including, diversity and inclusion, and, and taking better care of people. So there's a lot of theater. And to me, what this really reflects is an absence of follow-up. So if you go back to the old GE workout system, I think one of the reasons why the GE workout system worked is because there was actually follow-up. So the question is not, are we going to be innovative, or are we going to, have healthier employees, or are we going to reduce stress in the workplace? Are we going to do a bunch of wonderful things? The question is number one, do we have measures of what we're going to do? And number two, is there any actual follow-up? So one of the phenomena that I have observed, that I suspect you have both observed also, is to go to these board meetings. And this could be for a nonprofit board or a for-profit board. And every meeting starts anew. And the best board meeting I ever saw, it was a thing from my friends at DaVita, the kidney dialysis company. And what they would do in a board meeting, at the end of the meeting, they would say, okay, we're going to do, whatever the 10 or 15 or 20 things are on the agenda. And then the next meeting would come, and they would begin with, these were the 20 items for the last meeting. This is what we did. And if we made progress, this is how and why. And if we didn't make progress, this is why. And so there would be continuity. In many meetings and in many board meetings, there's no continuity, because the deal is the board of directors is here, and the people running either the nonprofit or the for-profit are going to put on a show. And so we're going to show you whatever our latest bag of tricks is today, and we're going to talk about whatever's on our mind today. And there is absolutely no continuity. So just the simple act of making a list and starting the next meeting with what did we do with the things we said we were going to do. DaVita's motto, one of their mottos, is "We said we did." I sit on a committee at Stanford which deals with human resource issues and with our issues of our health plans. And every meeting is a new meeting. It is if, every meeting we start anew with somebody presenting something, and there is never any follow-up. And I think that is actually typical. So the suggestion I'm making, you don't have to have an advanced degree, to figure out, which is that if you want follow-up, you need a mechanism in place to ensure that what you said was actually acted on.
It sort of reminds me a little bit about the checklist manifesto.
Absolutely, of Atal Gawande.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, a very good admonition to, reduce things to practice rather than simply talk about them and fill the room with a flood of words that don't translate into an action plan. Well, I wish we had 2 hours to talk with you, but I'm going to throw over to my partner, Brian, because I know I can read the body language. He's got some, definitely some things he wants to bring up with you.
Well, the body language is definitely using a standing desk and trying to find a position of comfort. Jeff, it's good to hear your voice again. I remember the last time we had dinner, you were working on your book, Dying for a Paycheck. And I think that topic couldn't be more important than it is today. And I'd like to just explore with the few minutes that we have left around the importance of wellness, especially in times of a pandemic when everyone suddenly had to shift overnight and almost put aside all of the challenges in terms of health and wellness that they were having in the office, and now suddenly be subjected to an entirely new regime of challenges, and also an entirely new genre of, I don't want to say ignorance, but let's just say not fully immersed in understanding what our employees and human beings were going through in these times, but still trying to keep productivity up. How do leaders need to think differently right now? What can they do right now differently to bring forward employee health and wellness? And I guess the last question would be why? Why should they care?
Well, I'll start with the last question first. And employers should care about health and wellness because, as I've already alluded to, employee health affects their productivity. Employee health affects their likelihood of turning over. Employee health, affects profits. So employee health is fundamental. By the way, employee health is good for the employees as well. So it's important. I think the estimates are excess healthcare costs cost about $180 billion a year. Some people will tell you that the mental health crisis in this country is costing over $200 billion a year. The American Institute of Stress says that stress is costing $300 billion a year. I've seen estimates that the cost is as much as $1 trillion a year. So, depression and stress are important, and employee health is a very important issue. What employers can do about it is going to go back to what our discussion was of the knowing doing gap. You cannot manage anything that you do not measure. And so a single item measure, how healthy do you feel, or how healthy are you? How would you rate your health on a 1 to 5 scale? Turns out to have predictive value, prospective predictive value. So it is interesting to me, particularly with the benefits administrators that we have. You should go to your benefits administrator and say, by the way, what's our ratio of claims compared to other companies with our same demographic and age distribution? How many antidepressants are our employees taking compared to other companies? How many ADHD drugs are they taking? How many sleeping pills are they on? You can look at your prescription data and norm it against other companies that have similar demographics or in the same industry, and say, and see, are you basically, making people sick or not? So you cannot manage. I think this is the mantra of the quality movement. I think it's right. It's management 1, not even management 101. You cannot manage anything you don't measure. So measurement is the first step, and then hold people again accountable. And if you've got, if there's some division of your organization where everybody's on antidepressants, maybe you ought to look at the leader and what the leader's doing and say, maybe we need a new leader. So I think that's the reason, and I think that's the first way to do this. And the thing that drives me nuts is that everybody is into, we're going to offer people stress reduction, and we're going to offer people smoking cessation, and we're going to offer people, this is all great. But, somebody said to me, what do you think about these stress reduction workshops? I said, what about a stress prevention workshop? I think with respect to employee health, it is exactly the same as almost everything else. Prevention is both more effective and more cost effective than remediation. I mean, this is true. John can tell you from his days as a physician, it is easier and cheaper to prevent disease than it is to try to treat the disease once it has occurred. And that's true for employee well-being as well. It is easier to build a workplace that permits people discretion, that removes the fear of job loss, that gives people reasonable work hours, that gives people support for their work-family accommodations, than it is to say, okay, I got some employees that are stressed and depressed because they don't know their schedule from one week to the next, because they're afraid for their job, because they are, because they're trying to balance the work-family issues, because they're working hours and having, people email them at all hours of the day and night. It's easier to prevent those bad actions and the stress and depression that it causes than it is to try to do remediation once it's occurred.
Yeah, we just had another guest on before you, who was helping grocers reduce the amount of waste that is basically factored into the business model today. And it's incredible of how much waste there is, but it's also incredible of how much, how manual the process of ordering food and predicting food needs are. And it makes me think, as I listen to you speak, so much of the challenge that we have, so many of the reasons why innovation theater is a theater, or D&I theater is a theater, is because this has just been the way of life for so long that, when you factor in cognitive biases, and then comfort levels, and then momentum, and then, normalcy, it just seems to be the way we do things, until the way that we do things gets to a point where we can't do it anymore because it's going to hurt us or cost us. And it makes me think, I don't know that I've ever, well, this is not true. I was about to say, I don't know that I've ever met an executive who didn't care about their employees. But I actually just thought of a couple. Some
have been in the New York Times recently.
Indeed. And so I guess that means, like, you have to, I guess, before you even, we even take accountability into measures or even measurements, we have to care. Yes. We have to care. We have to believe that taking care of employees is not only good for wellness, but it's good for business. I used to joke that HR stood for human resistance, in that, it's not, the whole system isn't designed for engagement and wellness and growth, and especially now with AI and automation and having to reskill so many employees. So I guess the last question before we run out of time here would be, Jeff, how do you get an executive to care, even if it's just caring about the bottom line, to take change or to inspire change faster than it's going today?
Well, it's a complex question. Let me give you, I think, a couple of answers. I think one reason why executives don't care is executives today, Rakesh Khurana wrote a book a long time ago, Searching for a Corporate Savior. There's way more outside succession today than there used to be. If I come in from outside and I don't know Brian and John, why would I care about you? How could I, why, I don't know you. I don't know the company. I don't know the business. I don't know the industry. So I think that's one issue. But I think, I have a friend who I'm sure you've heard of, Bob Chapman, who wrote this book, Everybody Matters. He runs this conglomerate called Barry Waymiller. And he said it just dawned on him one day that every person who came to work for his organization was somebody's precious child. And that his objective at Barry Waymiller was to send them home at the end of the day in at least as good shape as they were when they showed up in the morning. And to recognize that we are dealing, I think the language has been very kind of harmful human resources. My friend Dennis Bakke, the co-founder of AES, said steel is a resource. People are people. I think to have more contact with people, to see people, to be more in touch. I think many executives, are too different from the famous Herb Kelleher, who used to go out and fly in the planes and talk to the employees. So I think it's a social distancing issue that's part of it. I think it's a succession issue as part of it. I think human resources has not done a very good job of explaining to companies exactly what the ill mental and physical health of their employees is costing them. By the way, mental ill health, depression prospectively predicts cancer, heart disease, and diabetes. So if you're concerned about your health plan costs, you need to have people who are less stressed and less depressed. So I think we need to get data in front of people, and I think we need to keep repeating the message.
Yeah. Well, thank you for doing what you're doing, Jeff, and also thank you for joining. And next time we'll get you you get your mug on here and get everybody to see.
I'm looking at this picture, and this is not a picture of what's behind me. I have no idea what this is a picture of, but anyway, it's amazing. But I will talk to our video people, and I'm sure they'll fix it.
Well, thank you, Jeff. John, over to you.
Jeff, it was great to meet and to have at least your voice. I think both of our sessions today really provide us with a lot of food for thought. So it makes me more excited than ever, Brian, that we're doing Intersections, because what a great perch to be able to bring these great people and these great ideas forward, and to be able to make them available.
Yes, absolutely. What an inspiring conversation. It's always inspiring. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in this week. Please make sure to check back episodes at intersectionslive.com. Subscribe to our newsletter here at techintersections.substack.com. Please follow John Kao on the socials, at Brian Solis on the socials. Continue to chime in on the social feeds where you're watching this video now, and we'll make sure that we engage with you as we can. And also, if you need to share any ideas or recommend any guests, please reach out to us. It's very easy to contact us at intersectionslive.com. And with that said, thank you. And let's have John take us out with his original composition,